Hello, world, and welcome back to another episode of Practicing Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. My name is Sarah, and I'm here with my friend Lizelle. Today, we're going to be talking about episode 16, which is called Christianity and Agape. And so I'm going to pass it over to Lizelle to get us started with a quote.
Hello, world. Yes, I might geek out a little bit today with this quote. This is my first great love before I discovered Plato and the Bible. So I do tend to get a bit enthusiastic. But I thought it was beautiful. So I'm reading from John, seeing that we're busy with John's work. The second letter from John, but John the Apostle, not John Vervaeke. And okay, I'm starting from the beginning. The elder, he says. So it's from the elder, O presbyteros, to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all those who have known the truth, because of the truth which abides in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace will be with you from God the Father and from the Lord Jesus Christ, the Son of the Father, in truth and in love. In aletheia kai agape, agape is the Greek. In aletheia kai agape, in truth and love. I rejoice greatly that I have found some of your children walking in truth, as we received commandment from the Father. And now I plead with you, Lady, Kyria, not as though I wrote a new commandment to you, but that which we have from the beginning, that we love one another. Agapumen allelus, that we love one another with agape, is the word that he used, the Greek word, agape. This love, that we walk according to his commandments, this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. And this is the commandment that you have heard from the beginning. You should walk in it. So walk in agape, walk in love.
Yeah, that's really nice. Especially because like walking indicates there's a path. And that was the whole concept that we've been covering, is that there's now like an idea of a story, a narrative that people are producing because of this, I guess, the I guess Hebrew tradition of the narrative playing out. So there's a storyline and co-creating with God of the future and that kind of thing. And so, yeah. Anyway. Yeah, walking. It indicates there's a path and I guess a chronological order to
the way. To me, it reminds me of that, the way.
mm-hmm.
The fact that we were talking before we started recording about maybe if we don't want to identify with a specific religion, just saying we are followers of the way.
Yeah.
And why do we need to identify which way? But we are following a way.
Yeah.
We are devoted to a way.
Well,
Because
that,
last time, yeah.
I was just gonna say that show Mandalorian. That's like the quote that they have is "This is the way."
Oh.
Yeah, it's like a recent
Yeah.
Disney kind of show. Anyway, sorry.
I was thinking, but I'm completely getting off track now. Last time we talked about if you don't devote yourself to one way, if you keep walking different paths, there's not really,
Yes.
you can't really progress. And I think this is pretty good advice from John, to walk in love,
Yeah.
to walk the path of love.
Yep.
That's
If any path, why not
it's
this one? You know?
exactly.
Okay, well, Jesus Christ, the Kairos, the turning point in the course of history. Um, I guess in this one, now we're going to cover what did the story of Jesus of Nazareth contribute to how we make meaning and understand wisdom? Because that's what
Mm,
he says in the beginning. So
mm.
I'm believing him. But Jesus, with this idea of being a Kairos, is saying that he deeply participated with God and the way that God involved him in history.
So Jesus becomes a kairos. He himself
Okay.
becomes a turning point in history. He is the manifestation of God's intervention in the unfolding of history. That's what this means, that when we speak of Jesus as the kairos. So, because we remember long time ago, we talked about the Jewish idea of history unfolding,
Yeah,
and that
that's what I was
God
trying to
is
get
the
at earlier. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, and that God is the God of the open future,
yeah,
and we participate in creating this future.
yep,
And then at certain points in history, God would uh, intervene like quite dramatically, like the Exodus
yeah,
and things like that. And then Jesus says, "I am one of those big points where God is intervening."
yeah,
Um, and my intervention, and thus far, I can actually very much still go along with this. My intervention, then Jesus says, to bring to you to proclaim to you the good news, because that's what evangelion, if the uh, the oh, I should really learn these things in English. The 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 evangelie, the good news, the gospel means the good news. The evangelion is that God is love. I'm getting ahead of myself, but that is exactly what Jesus is. Then I'm this turning point,
yeah,
telling you God is love.
yeah,
I'm here to manifest the fact that God is love.
yeah.
That that is the turning point that Jesus is bringing.
Right. Yeah, and so I don't know if he says it. I don't know if John says this, but loving the course. I think he does say that. Um, participating in that open future and loving the course. So I don't know if he said it. I don't know if he was talking about Jesus, and I don't know if I just wrote something down because sometimes that happens
Well,
too.
that really moves me profoundly, but
Yeah, I
also
like.
for reasons
Yeah,
that
yeah. It
but
makes it easier
yeah.
with this message of there being this God of love that, and then I am participating with it. I'm loving the course
Mm,
naturally because it is love that
yeah.
I'm participating with.
What I have written down, and this is what John said, is human beings participate by identifying a particular cause, the way that we talked about,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing it, participating in its flow, knowing it, like that da'af knowing that we talked about also when we talked about the Israeli or the Israelite or the Jewish way of understanding their actual age contribution. That was that idea of da'af, like knowing by loving, like
Yeah.
that one where he went into the tent and he knew his wife. That it's so intimate that it can also be referred to as physically becoming one with another person.
Mm-hmm.
At one is the next word that, because he just says atonement, but then I remembered, no, atonement is also at one,
Yeah.
and so I wrote at one.
Yeah. Have making it while it makes you.
Yeah,
And he even says he's come.
reciprocal
Yep. Yeah.
revelation. I think I read it.
Yeah. And then you said something about not beliefs, I think, too.
Yeah, a transformation. And I'm gonna, because then I also refer to this book, which is a few episodes ahead of us, I think two. But it's very much the author, she April, writes about also the first Christians, and it was very much a participatory thing. It was very much not having a set of beliefs and having to say them every Sunday in church so that you can go to heaven. It's like experiencing God, you know, in the way you interact in the world, experiencing God interacting with you in the world, and knowing God in that way, instead of just having your dogma, your
Right. The
propositions.
propositions. Yeah, that's what I was looking for too. Yeah. To speak in John's language.
Yes.
Yeah.
Participatory knowing instead of propositional knowing.
Yeah. So we're born out of an agapic love that precedes us. We both really like this
That's
quote.
also beautiful.
We gain our self understanding by how we are reflected through others as part of the like growing up as an adult. But yeah, we are born out of an agapic love that precedes us.
That's really beautiful.
That's incredible because it kind of like, I mean, it just like confirms an external entity somehow, strangely. I don't know.
To me, it makes me feel completely cuddled by the collective.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like
Exactly.
all of history precedes me and shaped me
Mm-hmm.
because it preceded me in a certain way, you know. It's like, and
Cradling you.
yeah, that cradling within the history of humanity,
Right.
like because human beings in the past were able to learn how to make fire, you know, there's so much that I have because others have sacrificed and suffered before I was born, and
Mm.
it's
That's an interesting way to put it. Yeah. Hmm.
even if, you know, it's not necessarily divine, there's definitely agapic love pre holding us,
Yeah.
holding us. But we'll come back to it being necessarily being the divine later.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We'll do that.
When he
So
says, how do we, without this metaphysical view?
without God. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, because this is important though, that understanding this difference between the erotic love and the agapic love with the child and how a child is actually consuming love because they're not necessarily giving it freely. Sometimes they do actually, but you know, for the most part, the child is consuming this form of love, this agapic love
Yeah.
from their parent, right?
Yeah.
And he's saying like the agapic love is making a non-person into a person, so a slug into a human. And with the child, they consume the love. It's too simplistic though for it to be just sexual when we talk about it, but it is erotic.
Yeah.
And
He refers to Freud there because Freud made everything sexual. He said it was a
yeah.
sexual attraction that the child had to the parents.
And
And he
then
said,
there's that
oh,
whole,
that's a bit simplistic.
I
Yeah.
mean, but like just think back to Oedipus. I mean,
Mm,
you know, the trope is there or the symbolism is
mm,
there. It just
mm.
wasn't I don't think it was, maybe in its time it was provocative, but for some reason that story of, well, I guess it is actually like when you think about the whole story, when you say Oedipus's name, for some reason it doesn't really get it, but when you
Yeah.
start to go through the whole plot as you talk
Yeah.
about it maybe not
But
being so bad.
in
That
an
bad.
maybe not actually, because there were also studies that children who were raised together, even if they weren't physical blood siblings,
Yeah.
would not consider actually mating with each other because it felt like brothers and sisters.
Mm,
Well, I can't pronounce his name, Oedipus. He was taken away from his parents,
right.
so he wasn't raised with them. So um, the meaning that he assigned to this woman was not that it was his mother.
Right. And so you feel
So
that sense of I
it's
have a
like,
connection with this person and then yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
misconstrued. But yeah.
yeah,
So interesting tangent. But no, it wasn't really a tangent because yeah, like introducing Freud, it just really made it sexual.
yeah,
So
yeah,
probably some projection on his part.
yeah.
And Because for the one giving the not because, but for the one giving the agape, however, this is definitely not egocentric at all.
Mhm.
They are no longer the center of their salience landscape.
Mhm.
This is the metanoia of agape. And so he's really emphasizing how this is very apparent for those who have become apparent.
Yeah.
It's really funny. I didn't try to do that. Because I was like,
Sometimes you
okay,
just have to make the joke yourself to get it right.
yeah, exactly. Because I made the argument before we started, which I'm
Yeah.
just gonna say anyway. Of it just isn't just people that become parents, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny because I don't know.
Yeah.
You start parenting people even if you're not a
Yeah.
parent.
Mm. Yeah.
Once you start to get some level of self understanding, then you become that that
Mm.
thing that people interact with that can help them to just express themselves, whatever it is that the person
Mm.
needs
Mm.
that you can sense.
Mm.
You start to provide that for them, and that is agape.
I mean, that's the quote that I read. He says we need to be, uh, we should show agape to each other. That's the whole call of the way of following Jesus, is to show agape to each other.
Yeah.
So it's not just the parent-child relationship. It's we're called also in communities to.
Yeah.
I mean, we have agape love
Yeah,
between us as
totally.
well, because we help each other to transform and to grow and to become more fully human.
Mm-hmm.
So you show me agape, I show you agape. So it's, and you can say maybe, oh, well, it's reciprocal, so maybe it's philia, but it's more than that. It's
Yeah.
definitely more than that. There is
Yeah.
agape love in this as well. So
Yeah. Yeah, because there's like a sense of something outside even of us, like
mm,
an external entity.
mm,
And
yeah,
so in that way it's love, like the thing that we're experiencing outside of one another is still
mm,
an effort or a quest for that love. So
mm,
yeah, the agape.
mm,
We are centered around the process of creating people together.
mm.
Okay. He says centered on a process of creating a person. That's what agape is.
But I
We
love the way you said it. We are centered around the process of creating people together. If that is our
yeah.
calling, Sarah, then I fully embrace that.
Actually, yeah, especially with the ominous shadow of AI buzzing in
Yeah,
my mind. Although
exactly.
Pluto moving back into Capricorn has shifted it back to politics for a moment, a brief moment, but we're going to go back to this being AI is imminent and doomsday is coming. And so, yeah, making humans sounds like, and maybe not just baby making, but also making people. Got a lot of babies on this planet. We need some humans. Okay.
I want soul babies. I want to make
Soul.
soul and soul people.
The agape that precedes me flows through me and transforms me as I'm oriented towards it.
The way you that could be a mantra.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
just say it again.
The agape that precedes me flows through me and transforms me as I'm oriented towards it.
Yeah.
And a part of that is obviously a direct quote from him, but I think as I'm oriented was him kind of starting to drift off
Yeah.
because sometimes he says something like big and he
Yeah.
doesn't think anything of it and just continues through. So I'm like, let me just put something together so I can reference it because I don't know where this
Yeah.
trailed off to,
Yeah.
but somewhere in
Yeah.
his mind, like that's just accessible. And I'm like, hold on. I
Yeah.
gotta pull that down.
Yeah, we talked about this before. Like we have to
Yeah.
insert the pauses just to,
I
because he
gotta pause
doesn't. He
it.
just say these profound things and then he
Yeah.
moves on like he didn't just change my
I
entire perspective on
see. He didn't just rock my whole world with what you just said. Yeah. Yeah, it's just accessible for him. That's what I'm trying to do in this endeavor too, is make this fluent.
Yeah.
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 Becoming a vessel through which agape creates other human beings in the sense of being seen as one, I think is something I said. So being seen as a human being. And
Mm.
I think that's something that's really important for me to mention because of things like for the professions that I've worked in, particularly now with supplements. Like
Mm.
astrology was definitely there too, but in the supplement world, in the health food world, I have customers of all different kinds, mostly people that are railing against the machine in various different ways. We have 7-day Adventists, and we have hippies, and we have veterans that don't believe in war. I mean, you name it, it comes into this store. Sometimes people just want to be heard. They come in and they'll tell me about their diet plan, their sleeping patterns, their fasting, regimen. And they might not buy a single thing, but they just come in to talk to me about counterculture in some sort of way. And in doing that, it's a very simple job for me. I get paid hourly to just listen to people talk about being a human. And then they leave and they're happy because I express to them real interest. And,
You paid them attention,
I
which
paid
is
them attention.
very expensive, actually.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And especially when you're
that's what,
somebody that's programmed into a way of paying attention to something other than you. For me, it's the rosary now, but before it was just like meditation with Sam Harris or whatever it was. But now there's something that I'm meditating over. And so I am a vessel through which they can experience that.
yeah, nice. It slipped my mind again. The Kierkegaard and Socrates book, the quote, when we talked about paying attention. Why did that jump into my head? Oh, Jacob Howland tells a story of how Socrates, stories, it has been said that he had such a way of paying attention to people that they felt truly seen, and that transformed them completely. That they felt like when they were with Socrates, they were the only thing that existed in the world for him. And how enlivening, how ensouling that is to have someone pay attention to you in that way. And that Socrates were able to do that. I think it was Jacob that told the story. It might have been Jonathan or John, but I think it was Jacob. So
Yeah, you said in soul again, so it caught me. And like, I'm glad you remembered that though, because in our prep you couldn't remember that quote, but he does reference that
yes,
book, I think. Maybe not in this episode, maybe it's in the After Socrates, because I kind of blend those.
it's an After Socrates. I don't think
Okay.
he mentions it in.
Oh yeah, because he's about to talk to him and he's very excited. That's what he said. Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Being seen and paying attention, and how valuable that is in this world of grabbing your attention, and that being the economy. Like, people get paid to create content, and this was something that I mentioned earlier too. We're creating the content for those little screens that we have that we love so much, that we go to every day and worship and give praise to and rub and whatever, hold to our face and caress, whatever. These little screens that we make, and we make content for them as opposed to making people anymore. We're losing the agape. We're going to get to that. I think we didn't get to that just yet. But if this idea of creating a person is the pursuit of agape, then no longer participating in agape means that we're no longer creating people. Hey, guess what we have though is a content creation economy. And so that's my question that I'm presenting to me in the future, you in the future, and our viewers of, I mean, if that's the route that we're going, that's the route that we're going. But just let's see that as,
we are choosing for that.
we are
Make sure you are
that.
consciously choosing that.
Yeah.
And know that you are choosing that.
Yeah. I do see the value though of having this space, the virtual space, to co-create who I am. I've practiced a lot on here with you, with the coven, with my astrology group, with various communities that I've been a part of online during COVID. And I was telling you, like, I'm finally moving back out into the market, into the polis, into the community, and I'm starting to experience people where this is very important for me to have Jesus and that forgiveness of people before they approach me, because the uncertainty of other people, I can either meet with a fight or flight response, or I can already have in my mind that this is love that I have for this person, and I think it through conversations when I'm starting to get frustrated, impatient. Why are you taking up my time? You saw I had gloves and a hairnet on. Why are you bothering me? I'm filling up spices. But
yeah.
I think in those moments, I love you. I love you. You're
Oh,
something
that's
about
good.
you that's beautiful. I love your earrings. That's such a nice way you have your hair, or whatever it is that can make me feel the love that I have for that person in that moment. So, yeah, anyway, for me, it's been really interesting to experience this in my actual life
Mm,
as we go through this series without
mm,
trying to. I mean, it continues to happen where my life is coming through the message that I have, as my reflection on the episode that we're watching. But it's just
mm.
interesting how it aligns so well with actually what I'm going through.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I am curious because, yeah, if we start watching these a little bit more quicker on each other about releasing it, how our lives are going to speed up then, because it does. Our lives do absolutely correlate with the awakening from the meaning crisis as we go
Yeah.
through it. So
Yeah.
brace, Sarah. It's like it's
We're
gonna be a
awakening.
yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, even that's because I it can be draining people who demand your attention
Mm-hmm.
and telling yourself to love them and even not necessarily love something about them, but love the fact that even if they're a slug, they have the potential to be a human, and
Yeah.
you have that godlike ability to love
Ooh.
them into being a
Yeah.
person.
That's the
And
hard power for me to actually
yeah,
embody or
yeah,
embrace,
yeah,
wield. That's
yeah,
actually the really difficult. That's why I kind of have to use that entry of those
yeah,
are great
yeah,
earrings that you have.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
it is so hard for me to find that
yeah,
I can help create a person out of
yeah.
this.
And that I think that's a gift of we women. Also, we see potential and we can
Yeah,
love
that is
potential,
true.
which is sometimes in romantic relationships a bit wrong because then we fall
Yep.
in love with someone's potential and they never actually pursue
Live
it
up to it.
themselves and
Yeah.
um, actualize it. So that does cause romantic problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Women being able to see potential.
Yeah.
Double edged sword. The very machinery that makes us adaptable, makes us susceptible to.
Yes.
I
Oh,
almost got it.
awesome. Yes. Perfect.
Almost
Because
got
you
it.
quoted it without the fact that he did not mention it in this one
Got
episode,
it.
and yet we mentioned
We still
to bring
mentioned
it
it.
in.
Yes. Okay. Even if I couldn't get it fully out, almost got it. And it was during an episode where he didn't say it. So success.
Yeah,
Okay.
the machinery that makes us highly adaptive also makes us susceptible to bullshit.
Bullshit. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's basically what it comes down to. Or to, no,
Yeah.
let's not ever. That's basically what it comes down to.
Right. That seems like it's like adaptable on a species level too,
Yeah.
as far as like women being able to recognize this potential. And I guess,
Oh yeah.
like I don't mean men too, but that's like a particular um red flag we always miss is
Yeah.
when we're
Yeah.
seeing someone's potential as
I
opposed to
think
who
it's
they
a
actually are.
women are really big on seeing potential.
Seeing potential. Yeah.
Mm.
It seems adaptable because yeah, you're always hoping to inspire aspirations in your offspring.
Plus, it's also just mating. I mean, if you're capable of seeing
Oh,
someone's
yeah.
potential while he's still young and very virile,
Yeah.
then you're like, oh, he's going to be big and strong one day.
Right.
So let's have sex with him now
Right.
and get pregnant. And um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it's also like
Mate choice.
sexual selection thing
Yep.
is also,
Yep. So Christian community. Uh
yes.
a place to radically transform others. I'm putting it on the billboard.
Yeah, yeah. I only have the way and God is agape. That's all I have written down for that.
That's so cryptic. But it's funny because I wrote agape is God and you wrote God is agape.
Love is God. Well,
Yes.
I'm used to saying God is love, but it is pretty interesting to put it the other way around. Love
Yeah.
is God.
Yeah. I think he says that a couple of times in this episode.
That agape is God.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
That is a very
I
cool
think I wrote
way
it
to
down in
have
the
a.
order he said it. Yeah.
Well, I might have wrote it down
Sometimes
in
I
the
mix
order
it
that
up.
I think it.
That's what I'm
So
thinking.
that's
That's
yeah,
what I'm thinking. So agape is God. So love is God.
yeah.
Yeah.
But especially agape, this human, that could be because later, uh, I, yeah, when we get to this metaphysical worldview,
Oh, okay, yeah.
then if we see God or love as God,
Mm-hmm.
that could be a way into non-theistic uh, metaphysics,
Yeah.
and still incorporating this this agape, this way of love, this, yeah, the way of love. That's
It's
beautiful.
funny because I see the agape as the umbrella within
Yeah,
which the other forms can fall.
yeah,
It may not be true because he expresses them in this episode as three different types and probably more than just three, but
yeah,
he expresses these eros, philia, and agape as three different forms, but I see the agape as the umbrella of the others for the purposes of being on this path of, I guess, the way.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm now thinking of Plato because this morning I read book 4 of the Republic, and I was very confused when you just said that, because then it was like, oh, yeah, I just read it. But he talks about how justice or righteousness is kind of the umbrella of the other virtues.
Oh,
So this idea of one virtue or one form of love being the umbrella of others and calling others into being, and is yeah, it's also in
interesting
Plato.
to say justice, though. Honestly, for me, that one's a little bit more frightening than agape, at least. Agape being the umbrella.
Why frightening?
Um, well, because justice sort of has that sense of authority without compassion for some reason.
Mm,
I think
mm,
that might just be like a connection I make with it. And
mm,
for me, with agape, I'm associating it very much with forgiveness and giving before because
mm,
that's the connection that's
mm,
been made here.
mm,
And so
mm,
there's just something more gracious
mm,
about that agape being the umbrella as opposed to
mm.
justice. It's
Yeah,
cold.
but
It's
I don't think Plato understands justice as something cold
I see.
necessarily.
Okay, yeah.
I'm still trying to figure out what he exactly understands it as.
Yeah.
But it almost feel like letting people be who they are. It almost feels like that is justice
That's
to
justice.
him, and giving people the whatever they need to
Okay.
have so that they can be who they are.
In a sense, it's a little bit like forgiveness. There's like a
Yeah,
distinction
yeah.
though, but
There's
it's
something agapic in it, like,
yeah,
because it's this creating people, and providing them with the opportunity to be who they are, is
yeah.
letting them become persons and letting them become the persons they were meant to be.
They were meant to be.
Meant to be well, in that we're all born with certain capacities, and giving us the room to cultivate those
Yeah.
capacities.
Yeah,
And,
using the
and
word in that sense of when a picture doesn't do something justice. It's like not giving
yeah,
you the full essence
exactly,
of it.
exactly,
Yeah.
that is a perfect connection. Yeah, the
Yeah.
injustice being, yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's interesting how that word can be
yeah,
used that way too.
yeah.
Okay, so interesting distinction there because now, like, we're talking about the Christian community, so you've kind of not, I don't know, you probably wouldn't feel comfortable saying it, but just like a little representation of kind of what the Neoplatonists might have as a, yeah.
My community,
Yes, your
my
community versus
community.
my community. My people versus your people. This is where
Oh,
we do
we
not
work
agree.
together, darling.
But we can
We're
come
on
together.
both. Yes.
You have my sword.
And you have my axe.
All right. Agape is God, God is agape, offering to non-persons a way of transforming into a person. So we're talking women, widows, sick people, poor people, all these non-people, because we take so for granted that, that those affordances, I guess, are just natural for us. Human
Mm,
rights even being a
mm,
concept, or
mm.
yeah, equality or whatever.
So who would you think is non-people today?
Well, there's that class of people called the untouchables in India is where my mind automatically goes to
Mm,
every time. The
mm,
untouchables, where it's just like literally people that are, if they're dying, you can't help them in that culture,
mm, mm. Oh, but when you said
Homeless.
that though, When you said that, like people are dying, but you can't touch them, I had to think back to the COVID thing,
Yes.
and where people were dying and they had to die alone. And so when I think of who's non-persons, I almost think of we all are non-persons to a
Yeah.
certain extent
Until we
in
have.
our isolation and in our that unable to huddle together. And
Yeah. That is. It's so crazy to have it as such a real experience that we've had now.
yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, like, I was very young when 9/11 happened, and my country like really mourned it, really came together, really took action. Um, and that was kind of the, last really major crisis event like that, as or and then the financial crisis happened, but that was like a different kind of crisis. And then we had a health crisis, and the health crisis was the one that woke us up to our losing humanity, especially when we had to self-isolate and no longer interact with one another. I mean, we were talking about this before. I wonder if everybody's going to have a coming out of COVID story, because I was telling you, like, about a year before COVID was when I started my remote job. So I was like ahead of everybody with kind of dissociating from the polis and really self-isolating. And then it's taken me, I had a couple extra years of being in my cocoon. And I've only recently come back to the polis, come back to the city, come back to the people, the uncertainty of other people.
The
And so I'm
community.
And so I wonder, like, what's this human narrative look like now that we did all have that dying, that death, and we're all coming alive again after that certain death of us all, the certain demise. Yeah, the fear that kept us all isolated. Yeah.
Because
That's
that's
a
so
transformation.
unnatural. That's so unnatural that we're frightened and then we isolate. That, I mean, what any animal species, they're frightened, they huddle together unless they have to scatter for prey, for an animal hunting them. But you get frightened. That's how we survived as humans. You huddle together. You come together, and we were forced to.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me
Yeah.
think of like the people with leprosy that Jesus was put his hands on, and
Yeah.
just like, how healing that is. And we've talked before about placebo, and, I don't mean to like science the shit out of the Bible, but there are ways that people can be
Yeah.
healed, and it's not something that's so easy to
Yeah.
understand. So, yeah, just being seen
Yeah.
can make people feel.
Being touched when you're untouchable.
Yeah.
Because the lepers, and you mentioned it, being touched when you're
Yeah.
untouchable, that the healing power in that,
Yeah.
indeed.
Making persons out of
Yeah.
non-persons. I mean, so radical for the time,
Yeah.
as far as we understand it.
Yeah. He
So,
was a pretty awesome dude,
yeah.
this Jesus.
Yeah, it's so hard to like to know that I've had animosity towards that
Yeah.
entity
Yeah.
because of the shadow that's been cast on him, because of people misusing his name, or, people misunderstanding the teachings because they've listened to people that claim to have a participatory relationship but don't actually have the participatory, only have the propositional knowledge of the written word. So, yeah, but he was an awesome dude. And there's like an appreciation that I think everybody can have, at least for that.
Yeah. I John starts this whole episode with this extraordinary individual.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's
yeah,
a beautiful, I had to write that down as well because it's beautiful.
yeah. So there's many communities around Jesus, around that time that he's mentioning, and he says that the key idea is the sacrificial element of Jesus, and that the agape is given before it's earned. So it's not reciprocal like philia, it's not consuming like eros. It's making myself an affordance for your transformation. That's what Jesus was exemplifying for people.
Making myself an affordance for your transformation.
And of course,
That's
because using the word affordance, I think of salience landscape, and
uh,
yeah, it takes me back to the cog's eye a little. Not that I can recall
well,
all of it.
there will always be God's eye in John. So
Yeah,
whatever
right.
John says, so
Through
I'm
his
sure he
lenses.
intended it.
Yeah. It's like having bifocals, and at some points, like I'm looking through the
Yeah.
the really fine print reading part of it, but then I can look up and look at the long distance too. Okay. Jesus does not present himself as the way to obtain the forgiveness, though. He says we must forgive others in order to have that relationship with agape.
Mm, mm,
Yeah. I mean, I've edited that quote a little too.
But it's, you must forgive in order to be forgiven. That's what Jesus says.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what the image that comes to me is like a vessel again, because that's what I'm gonna write, and we talked about the like that's like there's something flowing in on the top, and then there's something flowing in at the bottom. But you have to let it flow out so that it can flow in, type of thing. And it's like a circular thing almost, like you forgive because you have been forgiven, and because you have forgiven, you are forgiven. So
Yeah.
it's a circular thing. That's we love agapically because we have been loved agapically.
Mm-hmm.
We become part of, like when I talked about this feeling that I'm cradled by all of humanity before me, and when we become part of the cradle for others, that's
Yeah.
that's that's the idea, I think, of becoming someone who gives agapic love and not only someone who receives agapic love.
Yeah. Mm. Like being part of the quilt of agape.
Yeah,
Yeah. Weaving
yeah.
yourself in. So, some communities only care about his teaching and not about his death, but somehow his death enables to internalize and empowers them to transform others by as followers of the way.
Because it's like we said, it's the ultimate forgiving, is
Mm-hmm.
dying, so that others can live abundantly.
Yeah. Oh, while you were saying like it's like cyclical, I'm constantly thinking of it as a pattern that I can recognize because I pay attention to it.
Mm.
So when I'm participating in forgiveness, recognizing that I'm forgiven, I'm
Yes.
drawn. That's cyclical still, but it's a pattern that I'm recognizing
Mhm.
is my capacity to do that because, yeah,
Mm.
of the model.
Mm. Jonathan and Christopher talks about it in their conversation, A Brave New World or something like that. But I can't remember exactly what they say. But it's something along this
Mm.
lines.
Oh,
That,
that makes sense because Jonathan's really into symbols, right?
yeah,
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 yeah, yeah. That's how I am starting to pick it up. Is in order for me to avoid the self-sacrifice martyrdom, applying the teachings from somewhere else as opposed to I'm figuring it all out.
mm-hmm.
Because that figuring it all out, like you're saying, like you're not making any progress, but there is some sort of like always sacrificing the self to some sort of external either um, entity or reason. But yeah, well, I guess there still is with this. Anyway, okay, I'm just going to leave it there.
But the thing with agape is that you sacrifice because you have received the benefit of a sacrifice. It's not, you are not the first actor.
That's it. That's kind of where I was going. You
Yeah,
found it. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yes. It's, yep, in return for something. Yeah.
yeah.
Because
It's
then it takes that egocentric space away and brings
mm.
in that.
and it's a basal thing again. It's not you necessarily. It's because you have received that it flows through you. So it's not that you have to do out of your own, uh, uh, you know, yeah, do out of your own. That's all I need. It's not like you have to do out of your own. You're doing because you're part of this process, this pattern of being loved into being. You were loved into being, and because you were loved into being, you are capable to love of loving into being. That's
Yeah.
the
The community. I mean, that's what the you kind of just like summarized that whole section we were just talking about and brought us back into the episode. It's like it's the community because
yeah,
you are preceded by this agape and it was given to you, then you can
yeah,
distribute that, give that.
yes,
So we have this guy, Saul, who's an early persecutor of Jesus. Is that where you have us going into? Or did you have
yes.
something before?
I
Okay.
just have, I think it's beautiful, radical transformation of your entire orientation, of your entire way of being. That's what you get when you follow the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Because he emphasizes how it's really important to that word, the way. Like it's, and I even noticed this in the After Socrates latest episode. I think it was episode 19, where they're like giving somebody a checklist. This is what you do, and this is how you attain the thing that you want. And it's so, it's like so overplayed now with people being like, you can be a life coach, you can
Mm,
be a herbalist, you just take
mm,
these 4 online courses and you know everything. And it's like, it's not
mm,
that, that's not
mm.
learning something. But yeah, that presenting the way, there's room for you to play, I guess, in that.
Yeah, and that's beautiful to bring that together.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay, so I guess, yeah, with Saul, there's an interesting internal conflict for him in that he has this Jewish heritage, but is also really influenced by Roman order. And so he's actually persecuting followers of the way, and they're like insulting them as followers of Christ. That's actually like an insult at the time, it meaning the anointed one, but I guess they are using it in more of like a sarcastic kind of way or a condescending kind of way.
I'm not exactly sure. I should know this because I probably studied this. But when I think of what comes to mind is okay. So Christ was this godlike figure to them, if not God, and then they were called Christians, which is practically the same thing. So that is people then telling them, oh, you're imagining your Christs, your little Christs, you're like Christ. And they're like, we're following his way, but we're not the anointed ones. We're not the Christs, the Christians. We are the followers of Jesus of Nazareth or Jesus the Christ, depending on which community you were part of. Because there were communities for whom it was Jesus of Nazareth and not Jesus the Christ. So, yeah.
Okay.
So I think it's more like um, um, being over-identified with Christ. That was the kind of the insult. Like, no, we're not
Okay.
saying
I
we are
see.
the Christ.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I can't remember. I should
Okay.
know. But this is comes to mind. So I imagine I read it somewhere.
I
I
see.
don't think I thought about this.
I'm imagining it as like, and I've had this sense too about how people flock to a podcaster and they're just like
Mm,
all hail. And I mean, it from the outer perspective, it always, especially because I've been someone that's done that before too,
mm,
somebody that's just been so, yeah, infatuated and just like feeling like I have a connection with that person, and then like all of a sudden having this wake up moment where I'm like, whoa, hold on, putting a lot of faith into these people,
yeah,
and yeah, maybe starting to blindly follow them.
mm, mm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I'm still very much in love with Jordan Peterson. So,
Yeah.
but there was another talk on at the Stoa where John and Chris was, and two other people. One is Matt, I think, and the other one also Chris. And they talked exactly about this idea of um, some people have a lot of knowledge in certain fields, and then you venerate them for that. But then you take for granted that they know everything about everything, which is exactly what Socrates' knowledge that he doesn't know is exactly that. He knew he didn't know just because he had certain knowledge, he didn't know everything about everything. Because how he figured out he was the wisest, he would go to people who knew a lot, and then he would notice because they knew a lot in their field, they assumed they knew something of everything. And that we see that in the
Yes.
people who are known for their superb knowledge in psychology, and then all of a sudden they think they can speak about with authority about politics and everything. Politics and psychology is, of course,
Right. When we're
but
talking about that particular thing, but yeah, but the point is made. Yeah.
yeah,
Sometimes
yeah,
people, experts of a certain field, dabble in other areas, and even if it's not their intention, the
yeah,
audience
yeah. And
expects
then
their
if you're a
authority to
blind,
be
yeah, if you're a
that's the whole
blind
reason.
follower, you,
Yeah. So, right, with Saul, there's an antagonistic internal relationship, and then it is also I mean, well, it's a reflection of the uh antagonistic, and why do I keep screwing this up? Antagonistic relationship, the tense relationship between the Jews and Roman order at the time.
mm,
And so you were explaining that to me a little bit deeper, of the actual, what that actual tension is about, and how, like, um I guess, flimsy the truce between them.
fragile,
Yes, yeah,
fragile.
right.
The peace between the Romans and the Jews were very fragile. Um, so the Romans had rulership over Jerusalem, but it wasn't necessarily for Alexander the Great. He was like, you just do your religion, you just do what you want to do, but the Romans didn't have that. It was their subjects had to comply with all empire laws, and worshipping the gods of the empire, also the emperor himself as a god, was necessary. You had to do that. You could be killed if you refused to do that. But the Jews had the exemption. Exempt is that the
Yep, you got it.
they got like a privilege. They and a few others, I think, but okay, we know you're really big on this monotheism, so we will allow you to not to be exempt from these laws. But it was very fragile, and it was like you put one foot. There was a certain stage. I can't remember which emperor it was, but like in 70 after Christ, the temple in Jerusalem was completely destroyed because they were like, okay, no more of this. We now take away this right, and I'm not sure if it was with that destruction, but then the Roman soldiers, or the emperor himself, I can't even, probably not the emperor himself, he would not have bothered, but they went in to the temple and they sacrificed a pig
Mm.
in the temple to their god, which is of course Jewish law, no, like
Oof.
big no. So there was a lot of tension between them, like, we will give you this right, but you better behave. If
Oh,
you don't behave, we will take this right away from you. And all these like Christ means that the anointed one, which means the chosen king. So King of the Jews, as was written. So it almost felt like this political uprising.
yeah.
And also the Jews were like, if you again, Jesus Christ Superstar, I just love it. But you also see it in the Bible. One of the Sanhedrin, I think you call it, they came together and talked about this Jesus dude, which are stirring up the people. And they're like, no, our whole nation will be like put down, would be like destroyed if we allow one person to to cause riots. So let's just quiet these riots. And that was so. So Saul was walking this thin line by laws between complying to his Roman citizenship, but by being a good Roman and being a good Jew at
Mm.
a certain. And because the relationship between these was so fragile, I imagine that the two in him, I think that's what John is hinting at,
Yeah.
was also so fragile. Like, how do we, yeah.
Yeah, he was projecting that out. Wow, what was really coming up for me was how the Holy Land is divided now, and
Ah,
how that very same storyline, but interestingly enough, it seems to be that the government, oh God, am I going to get us canceled? The government is inflicting the same kind of, I don't know, I mean, like Palestine and Israel is coming up for me in that
Yeah.
description of persecuting people, saying, "Hey, you got a little bit of land, but you
Yeah.
screw up one time, and
Mm,
any kind of
mm,
like little things that are bubbling up out of there, as far as like revolts or whatever, they get shut down real quick." And it's interesting that reflection,
mm,
that mirror there of the way that people are treated in that
mm.
area and not able to leave and living in camps, basically restriction.
When I was when he talked about Saul being both a Roman citizen and a Jew, I had to think of the man from Nazareth that I had my Yeruchamos with. um, he he's from Nazareth, which is Palestinian territory, but he's Israeli. Exactly the same situation.
Yeah.
It's politically beneficial to be
Yes.
Israeli. Like it was politically beneficial for Saul to be a Roman because he
Oh,
was a Roman citizen. He could do all this missionary because he could go everywhere as a Roman citizen.
yeah.
As a Jew, he would not have been able to do
Oh,
that.
yeah. Right.
So same, exactly. Yeah.
Lord. Yeah. It's interesting. Cycles within cycles.
Circles within circles within circles.
So, with Saul, that internal conflict, that tense relationship between the two influences that really like brought him to law and this appreciation for law. And somewhere along this road, he had this transformative experience where he was struck by a bright light. Hears the voice of Jesus asking why he persecutes him, and he's blinded by a light.
The road to Damascus, blinded by the light.
Blinded by
Before
the
Bruce Springsteen, there was
right.
Soul.
Yes.
Soul. There was Soul.
Soul. And it's so funny.
Ensoulment. It's like
I was telling you, it's Mercury, well, Mercury retrograde, you can tell because of all of our little communication issues. But Mercury Kazemi is tomorrow, which is where the sun and Mercury meet at the same degree in the sky. And this is like a reset for Mercury, but it's also usually an insight or an epiphany because the sun is a bright light and Mercury is a message. So it's an insight or an epiphany that one receives. And we're talking about this here, this very transformative, new,
and
rebirth.
I'm also, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention this, but I'm also then thinking of the ritual that we're going to perform. And there will be a period where we're waiting for an insight.
Yeah.
So that's perfect timing.
Almost like it was planned, right?
Like I always say, it was planned, just not by us.
It was written. Yeah.
The author has a good sense of humor
Yes.
and really love patterns.
And symbols, yes. Right. He gets taken in by the very people that he was going to destroy when he is blinded. And it's, interesting. They restore his sight. And these were the very people that he was going to kill.
So they're practicing forgiveness. Agape.
Yeah, giving before. Okay, and then at that point he went to the desert, from what I understand. Is there any mention? Go ahead, sorry.
What do you want to ask?
Well, I was just going to say, is there any mention of what he's doing in the desert?
Soul searching.
Okay.
Ensoulment, soul searching, soul. It's a very typical idea in I think a lot of religions that you go to the desert in order to encounter, like to. In my mind, what he was doing, because he was disorientated by this light, so he was trying to reorientate himself. That's in my mind what he was doing.
Yeah.
And I cannot remember what the Bible says, but I don't think they go into detail, if I'm correct.
Okay, I have here the next thing. We like to think we are self-made, but Agape challenges that.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. And we think we're self-made, but we're not self-made at all.
Oh, and we're conflicting with Agape. because
Yeah.
it's the challenge. The agape is the challenge.
Especially Western individualistic man, the individualism of the Western society. It's like, no, I made myself.
Yep.
It's,
But
uh-uh.
actually, there's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of intellectual property that you're taking claim of.
yeah,
I would love
yeah.
how it's funny because he continues to use psychotechnology in this episode. It just reminds me of how Rebecca just can't stand the bro talk of psychotechnology. So that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
Agape challenges that idea of us being self-made, which is actually really like it relaxes me a lot. Okay, so I don't have to do everything. Hustle culture is like so bad with
Mm,
this.
mm, mm,
Hustle, hustle, because if you hustle, then you'll get the money and you'll get all
mm,
the
mm.
things that you want. It's like, no, chill out. Because it reminds me of when you said that one philosopher would go and grab a wheelbarrow just to roll it around just to
Diogenes,
do something. Who was it?
Diogenes, the cynic Diogenes. Yeah, it's
Which is
hilarious. I can
still
see it in front of
hilarious.
me. It's
Bullshit. Figure out
I
how to do
have to
stuff.
roll my barrel because everybody's busy, so I have to be busy. It's like exactly that. That's how pointless being busy is.
That is what hustle culture is. Like, go roll your barrel around. Paul goes to the desert, has that radical reflection, becomes a new person, changes his name even from Saul to Paul. So then he delivers that radical message of,
Mm,
now I will show you the most excellent way.
yes, because he himself has been transformed. So he's telling of his very own identity. He's knowing by identifying with this agape. He's not making like um, a scientific argument or any type of argument. He's just showing them like this is the way. This is the most excellent way.
Yeah,
That's what.
a framework of participatory kind of knowing.
Yeah. And then it's beautiful what he reads. Um,
Yeah, the love is patient, love
especially
is kind quote.
yeah, especially since I'm reading this and gnosis knowledge is really big, of course. And then even if I have all knowledge, I am nothing. It's quite
Mm. Yeah, for
quite
some
big.
reason, oh, actually, I went to the community garden and we were watching Patagonia films about the Earth, and one of them was Earth Rising, where the astronauts that did the orbit around the moon
Oh
were
yeah,
talking about that experience of turning the camera back around to the Earth, and they were like, nobody even thought to take that picture. We were so intrigued by the moon, the dark side of the moon, all the pictures of the craters and stuff. And the guy that got the picture was just like this very cynical guy about the camera too. He was like, "Yeah, I had the damn camera." Like he didn't even but the beauty
yeah,
of seeing the earth on the backdrop of nothing
yeah.
made them just yeah, really I don't know. Yeah, just have that awe, that sense of awe. So,
Mm.
anyway, that I guess that just
What
came back.
triggered this? What triggered this in your mind?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering is how I got there because we were talking about the most excellent way and it not being a
Oh,
scientific argument. And so these scientists, these astronauts out in space, they have all of this, exploration
mm,
in mind
mm,
and let's find out about the universe. Let's explore it further. Let's go out
yeah,
beyond. But when they turn the camera back to the earth,
yeah,
they just had this sense of that's where everything is, though. And I
yeah,
love that place.
yeah,
And no longer was it like the big scientific, adventure, the
yeah,
exploration, the going out. It was a appreciation and a longing for
yeah.
returning to that
Oh,
place.
yeah.
It's hit me big.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, yeah. That's beautiful.
That kind of agape, somehow that's
Yeah,
related, that
yeah.
feeling.
Now I'm thinking of a joke because this is beautiful and profound, but now a joke is in my head.
Yeah.
So this meme of the Earth, like that picture of the whole Earth, like It's beautiful, mind-blowing, and this longing for home. But then with this picture, it says like, this is a picture of me and Robert Downey Jr., which is
That's so true, though. 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon right there. Yeah. That's it, though. That's everything's there all together in one place. So yeah, that not making an argument anyway.
yes,
And
but
it not being,
showing,
yeah,
showing
showing.
and feeling and sensing and
Mm.
experiencing just this. Yeah.
That's what Earth gives
Mm.
us, the senses. Everything comes
Mm.
through the body.
Mm.
And when you're out in the void of space, I mean, there's no more, no time where it's more apparent what
Yeah.
we're given here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gravity.
Our home.
Our little blue dot in the sea of dots. So this is not this is not romantic love. This is not erotic love. And he says, well, in more or less words, this is agape. It cannot die, or personhood disappears. And that goes back again to that whole AI concern, AGI, or artificial general intelligence, of us turning ourselves into the computers because agape disappears.
But there's also something more for me, more already in existence about this disappearance of agape, because we're all so isolated, community without a community, without feeling this cradle of agape. And that's what I mean. I don't know if I said it while we were recording or before, that sometimes people, you can feel them drain their attention from you because they're so hungry for this attention. And if the majority of people, of the hungry ones, then they don't know, we forget how to give agape. We can only receive agape. And already in that isolation, that isolating ourselves, and because we do become empty by being this isolated, and already in that there's this loss of agape, because we can only consume each other then, because we're so hungry for others, that we're so unfilled that we can only consume. And this we can't. It's I feel a lot of that already in our present, that yeah, this
Well, it's bringing up for me having and being mode, and this
exactly
overconsumption, because I'm in this having mode. And also John mentions in this episode the consumption of children childs sorry. It got worse because I said the consumption of children and just left it there, but what I'm talking about, the nature in which children consume love, it just got worse. Mercury retrograde's killing me. But the way in which children consume love, and that, like, a bunch of fucking adult babies running around.
Yes.
Children.
Yes.
Because we're consuming, we're not in these different types of relationships, especially agape, but even philia, we're only in erotic, because we can have anything we want.
Well, philia to a great extent is lost as well, because people have fewer and fewer friends. Fellowship is lost. The community, that koinonia, that church community effect, or religious group community, I think, is to a great extent lost. So we only have this consuming, having mode.
Fill the void. Yep.
Yeah. And then the next part, when we were talking about it, we skipped it kind of, actually. Like he says, growing up, he said, like, I hope nobody as a grown-up is still over enthusiastic about candy and toys. But then I was like, well, we kind of are. And like, there was one Roman poet, it might be the same one that I referenced last time, Horatius, I'm not sure. that wrote like all that the people want is bread and games. Just give them bread and games and they will be happy. And I see that in America,
That's
who is
interesting.
currently the biggest empire, that the people just want bread and games, entertainment and being fed.
Yeah.
That's all
Instant
people.
gratification.
Yeah. And if you give it to them, they don't
It's
think anymore.
sheep.
They
I know. It's definitely,
So we are still to a great extent children, babies.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah, totally. Okay, well, and well, okay, so that's interesting. We're moving into gnosis.
Mm.
I do want to mention this part where I have romantic love. With that transition, you give up erotic desires to deeply know and be known by someone else. He mentions that about romantic love, which I thought was interesting because like the idea of giving up erotic desire for romantic love is just, it seems counterintuitive.
Mm.
But anyway, I don't know, because he was talking about how agape is not romantic love, how agape should be incorporated into romantic love, and I think that's kind of the way that he's saying it should be done. How you can
Mm.
incorporate agape into a romantic love is by giving up the erotic desire and deeply knowing and being known by someone else. And then that moves us into gnosis, which is knowing by participation,
Mm.
which is what Paul talks about. This way,
Mm.
the way of
Mm.
wisdom, the way to wisdom.
Mm. And I think we will go much deeper into that in the next two episodes,
Okay.
gnosis.
Okay.
And yeah, but it's that da'af, knowing by loving, knowing by participation. That is, and knowing the way by walking the way, you know.
Yeah. That's, I'm getting the image of keeping the path trimmed back so it's still walkable, cutting away
Yeah,
at like branches and stuff that are in the
yeah.
way, and just like continuing to
Oh,
maintain it.
that is a beautiful image because the path has been neglected. The way has been neglected.
And shit on. I mean, littered
Yeah,
all over.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there is actually not there's great need for people like
To
John, because
maintain.
we talked about before recording how John is bringing many people, we won't identify anyone, bringing many people back to Christianity.
Yeah.
And ironically, or maybe
He
not,
speaks the gospel
he
without
speaks the
believing in
gospel.
it.
He speaks the gospel without believing in it.
Well, and
And
that's what's another thing too that I would like to highlight is the fact that we were talking about how it's funny that, well, there's a conversation going in after Socrates where Kierkegaard is trying to use the lens of um, Socrates to find Jesus. And this, it's just an image that comes up that's pretty interesting to relate to this too. So, but
yeah, especially John being my Socrates.
that's
That's
right.
like,
Yeah, I wasn't gonna say it because I was like, oh, actually, I think we were supposed to talk about that part. But yeah,
no,
exactly.
we
But
can, no, I've talked about it.
okay.
I told John that he's
Yeah.
my Socrates.
Yeah,
So
exactly. So,
it's,
but that's interesting to
so,
think about how he is presenting that frame, that lens, that very pointed um archery course to
yeah,
Jesus. And I think
yeah,
it does have a lot to do with a lot of his friends being devout Christians or followers. And
yeah,
I think because he's having conversation with it, so it's almost like
mm,
Socrates continuing the conversation with Jesus,
yeah,
just through,
it's pretty cool.
the lineage
Yeah,
as they
it's
would.
pretty cool. I do want to say that I have become so fond of Plato and Socrates themselves, the originals, that I feel less and less need for the symbols of John and Chris, which is great because then I can appreciate them for themselves,
Yeah,
as because they're
yeah,
also in themselves amazing human beings. So
amazing humans. Yep, exactly. Yeah,
yeah, so I'm kind of weaned of John and Chris as symbols of Plato and Socrates.
yeah.
So that's nice.
Well, I think
Yeah.
that that's good to presence too, because that's actually, um, well, we're going to get into another misunderstanding, but that is something that is easily done. We were talking about it earlier with podcasters and stuff like that, like starting to have this sort of, I don't know how to put it, subordinate relationship understanding with whatever entity it is that is expressing to us the way. And so, yeah, that's a challenge, especially when it's embodied in human. And then when that human, tries to apply their knowledge of something that they are an expert in to something else, and maybe they aren't an expert in that thing, but we have that expectation as an audience that, oh, they're an authority, they are literally an authority, and they have much more wisdom than me. And so then we start to follow them with blindly. And so that's something important to presence, is that is what we're talking about when we talk about rug pull moments. When you start to follow something blindly without having that self-reflection of, am I just following blindly? Am I taking everything that this person has to say with the same level of value of the very valuable things that they've provided? Like, everything that they say isn't of the same high value as the really good golden nuggets that they can provide, because they're human. And so they have the human aspect of them, and it comes along with their understanding of the wisdom path, I guess. Anyway, all that to say is, it's easy to get attached to a false idol or and not to say that John would ever want that, because he says it expressly in a lot of the videos, like, don't take this as I have some superior knowledge. And I think that's why he provides a lot of resources and a lot of references too, is to say, this is all things that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, which is part of that, with you were mentioning when we were talking about the community of the Christian community just being cradled by all of civilization. The things that I'm capable of doing now are because of sacrifices that have been made before me.
And we're capable of having this conversation because John put years of thought into awakening from the meaning crisis. So we can practice awakening from the meaning crisis without putting in all those years. We can just put in 3 years.
Yes. And the summaries provided, the way, and
the way,
and and the references for that way. So it's almost like, he has gone through and just like gotten rid of the big branches,
Yes, yeah, but we still need to do some.
But we still have to do maintenance.
Yeah. And I'm not necessarily talking about just what we're doing here,
right?
But other things as well.
Yeah.
The way needs to be retrampled, or now the desire path comes to my mind. We talked about the desire path before we went to Holly's land. Like, she taught us that. Yeah. So we need to create a desire path again.
Yeah.
That was a very long.
I know, and it's so funny because, like, I was going to tell you before we started recording that it's so
Let's just stick to the.
It's so tempting sometimes to edit out what we talk about, but it's still important and it's still relevant, if for nobody else than for us to re-enter that mind sight. So anyway, there is a danger of misunderstanding this.
Oh, it's perfect, because it actually relates to what you just said. It's the projection thing. And if you project your authority, that's what you do when you just blindly follow some podcast or what, you project your authority on that person. But this is a different type of projection that John is talking here in Paul. He's experiencing conflict in himself, so he's projecting that conflict onto God and seeing it there as well. So projection can either be that there's something in yourself that you don't see, so you throw it on someone else and then venerate it or hate it in that other person, or it could be something in yourself also unconscious, which you then throw on someone else to make sense of it in that way. And that's what Paul is trying to do. He's trying to make sense of his own inner conflict by saying, well, that's part of the metaphysical structure of reality, so it's not just me, it's all of being is like this.
Whoa, so, isn't that interesting? Because it was Freud too. That was like a generalized statement, not the same message, but with Freud, we were talking about how he might have projected his own internal desires onto his work. And with this one, Paul is projecting his own internal conflict onto God and the universe and how the structure of things works because I'm having this internally, so it must be this big,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's where he says what you just said, which is any aspect of the self that we don't understand gets projected onto what we love. So yeah.
Okay, but see, this is what makes all of this so complicated, because we need each other as mirrors. We were talking about he talks about it in the beginning of that's what agape is. It's making us. That's how we make ourselves and how other people make us, as mirrors and reflecting us back to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So this reflecting and projecting is something that what makes us most adaptable. It's that thing. It helps us to adapt and to grow and to become persons. And if we're capable of identifying it as projection, then we can incorporate it, and we can just like expand our being to such a great extent. But so it's only dangerous as long as it's unconscious.
Yeah.
And he's claiming that for Paul it was unconscious.
Which, I mean, I don't know Paul. I don't know Saul either. But I think it would be an easy thing to do. I think a lot of us do that a lot
Yeah.
of the time and don't have any realization of it until maybe we've reflected later or if we've reflected in the moment. But yeah, I think that's a really easy thing. It is an easy thing to do. It's what we naturally do to understand
If we
ourselves.
don't live the philosophical life in the Socratic way, the Socratic life,
Right.
in that self-knowledge, because
Yep.
that's what self-knowledge is all about, realizing when you're projecting and
Yeah.
when it's,
Oh, yeah.
or it helps with that. It's not what it's all about, but it helps with
Right.
that. This quest to know yourself, that's what, if you don't do that, and I mean, thousands of people, millions of people don't do that, then
Oh, yeah.
it just stays as projections. That's the thing.
So interesting how there has to be that relationship to really understand the self.
Yeah. Maybe because the self is a relational being, or the
Yeah.
relational entity.
Yeah. He says here, I think quoting John, that Christ lives in the transformed self, or Christ lives through Paul. I think that was something that, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jesus said, I and the Father are one.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Something's bubbling. Don't know what it is, but something
But
interesting.
that's not necessarily projection. That's oh, when we get to the Gnostics, we can delve deeper into that as well. It's that at one moment,
Yeah.
and the way I read it, but I might be completely misguided, is Jesus claiming that the Father and I are one. I am at one with the Father. He did not claim that exclusively for himself. He claimed that for all of humanity, that we're all actually at one with the Father through this agape love.
He says through the agape love. Well, it's
Yeah.
interesting because I am having this, like, I don't know. I'm just like mulling over this idea of relational and how it's the duality, the relational, there's something in that where it's through the agape with the quote that you just said, but it is interesting how I mean, I don't know how to fucking put it into words. There's that thing that the dialogue and seeing through the lens of Socrates, Jesus, and building that relationship in that way where it's a recognition of knowing that I cannot embody it fully all the time, cannot be Christ. I can allow myself to be a vessel through which others can experience Christ in themselves. But yeah, but but it's important for me that it's Christ consciousness that I'm able to take on, not just the idea of agape, just the forgiveness, forgiving, but there's like that reason, which is the death and resurrection, the sacrifice.
Your own personal kairos. That's like your own personal kairos. That dying and being born again.
Yeah.
It's The quote that I'm going to end with kind of relates to this. Well,
Okay.
completely relates to this. So,
Completely. Okay, so that idea of projection with Paul is kind of the main emphasis, and him projecting that internal conflict.
mm, mm. And I think
And
it's something we all have to worry about. Like
yeah.
Chris said something about in the last episode of, or John quoted Chris to Chris, and then Chris said yes, that he thinks people's metaphysical views are based on their aesthetics. I think we all do it. We all project what is playing in inside of us.
Hmm.
Um, I have a very deep sense of being loved because I
Yeah.
was raised by loving parents. So I have a
Mm.
very deep sense of being loved by the universe. You know, that's
Same.
for me. That's the nature of reality is love, because that's
Yeah.
how I experienced it. Which is, yeah, I'm grateful that that's my perspective. But it could very easily be like Paul's, that
Yeah.
everything is conflict, everything is civil
Yeah.
war. That's
That's interesting. Yeah. Mm. Like a lot of stuff went through, and then yeah, it's weird how it's just leaving me today. He says here we do the opposite of what we should. Um, someone in the midst of a civil war.
mm,
Yeah, we do the opposite of what we know we should do. And then I have written Christianity personalizes it. That inner narrative for understanding.
Christianity gives a narrative to understand it by. Like we're all
Yeah.
fallen creatures, and hence the old sinful natural man is pulling you down. But this spirit, Christ within you, the Holy Spirit within you, the new man, that was the born again man, the spiritual man, is the one who wants good and does good. But the
Mm-hmm.
body, the flesh, gets in the way and does the bad. So you have two people inside you, the old man of the flesh and the new man of the spirit. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
narrative that Christianity gives to help us understand what this conflict is about.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Well, Plato has this free part, which we talked about when we talked about Plato. This free part, the Lusty, we called her Lusty, the lioness, and the lady,
Yeah.
and so that's why there's conflict according to Paul, so,
Right.
Plato.
Plato. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
So it says Paul takes on the notion of sacrificial love. Jesus sacrificed himself to satisfy God's demand for justice so that God is capable of loving us. So
mm,
that's Paul's kind of summary is yes, and this is what Paul said. That's kind of, I guess, a big
mm,
possibly misunderstanding is that Jesus sacrificed himself to satisfy God's demand for justice so that God is capable of loving us to kind of resolve that inner conflict that he had,
mm, mm, mm.
Paul himself had,
Yeah.
and then
Well,
therefore
John
God
is
had.
claiming that it's a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Um, I don't want to make any claims because as I just said, I'm very confused.
Yeah.
But John does point out, and it's true according to the Bible, that Jesus himself did not refer to him as a sacrifice for God's wrath.
Hmm.
That um, he never said it himself. That was Paul who made that whole pretty narrative of
Yeah.
this is how everything works. Any narrative that tells you this is how everything works. Oh my
Yeah.
word.
Right. I know. Um, Within this foundational message is an attempt to project that the course of reality is a conflict between justice and agape, of us
Yeah.
not living up to our potential.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I commented I experience it as aspiration, which I think
Mm,
is, kind of the antidote to that
mm, mm.
misunderstanding is seeing it as
Yeah.
aspirational.
Well, maybe we can then jump into the antidote, because he ends with what is the antidote? Like Christianity has given us these expectations of love and transformation and growth into personhood and relief from inner conflict. But now
Mm-hmm.
we don't have that necessarily anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And even if we're in, um, you know, we identify with the Christian traditions, we don't necessarily have that, because we don't have that necessarily that personal experience with agape. So how do we deal with that? Because he said, like, how do we tap into the agape gnosis without the machinery of Christianity? And we can't, and that's why we fall into despair. But there must be a way. There's always a way. Like,
There's always a way.
I'm and that's what I was talking about earlier, I think. But I don't know. Before we started, while we were talking, I was thinking of a way, but now I've forgotten it. But when I was listening to and making the notes, I was like, I don't think I can do this without a personal God. I'm not sure that I can, unless you take the community, but that's also very dangerous. The community as the agapic source. That's very dangerous. And
Very.
it's
Because I mean, that's kind of what we have with trial by trial by media or whatever we have now. You're accused guilty before you ever even go to trial. Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of terrifying to put the community responsibility in the hands of a collective like that, especially human collective. I don't know. It's weird.
And I mean, that's the whole 20th century, the genocide of, of the political aspirations to put the community in the role of God. That's not a good idea. So I don't know if we can do it without God, without a personal God. I don't know if I can do it without a personal God.
Yeah. Without the Christian metaphysics of cosmic redemption, as he put it, which I like. I like the idea of cosmic redemption.
But for me, it's more, what is the source of this agapic love that's flowing through me? It's like, I can't be the source. Although in my recent talk with Vervaeke about ritual, my ritual, she mentioned that she saw like a rose that keeps blossoming, and that I do, and I struggle with this fear that at a certain point I'm going to be empty. There's not going to be anything more to give. But she said, like, no, what I see is a rose that keeps blossoming, that there's always more coming. So maybe it's just something that I need to work out for myself. Like, what is this source of flow of agapic love? That, because that's also when I feel empty, that's when I get frustrated with the people who demands my attention.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, you're asking me to love you. You don't even realize you're asking me to love you. You think you're just asking me to listen to your story, but you're not. You're asking me to love you. But I have nothing in me at this moment. And where do we get that? What's the fountain of this agapic love, which we do feel flow for ourselves?
Yeah.
Fortunately, often. But so maybe I can end with a quote.
Yeah.
So it's from 2 Corinthians 4. I shared it with the group after Isa showed us the flute that she made that looks like a pot. Therefore, since we have this ministry, as we have received mercy, we do not lose heart. But we have renounced the hidden things of shame, not walking in craftiness or handling the word of God deceitfully, but by manifestation of the truth, commending ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God. But even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, whose minds the God of this age has blinded, who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them. For we do not preach ourselves, but Christ Jesus the Lord, and ourselves as bondservants for Christ's sake. And then I'm going to read and translate from my Afrikaans version because I like it more. I'll just read in English. We who have this treasure in us is mere vessels of clay, that breaks easily, the power that surpasses everything, comes from God and not from us ourselves. Thus far, our scripture reading.
I like that. I like the imagery of the clay vessel.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's so much. Because in a participatory relationship too, and so there's a lot of that wants to come through. But I think we'll just have to leave it there because we've gone on so long now.
This was lovely, Sarah. I think we can talk about agape and Christ and Jesus of Nazareth for ages.
Yeah.
And I'm
As
sure
has
we
been
will.
the example, at least for a couple of them. Cool. Well, all right. So moving on, next week, whenever we release it, we'll be talking about episode 17. But in the meantime, be sure to join us at the Stoa after Socrates, noon on Sundays. That's Eastern time. And anything else you wanted to add, Lizzo?
I love you.
Love you. I love being here. And I hope that you love and enjoy these episodes, and we'll return again for the next one. We'll see you there. Mwah.